Hello and welcome to another edition of Monster Island Radio. I'm Ben, and as usual, I'm joined by the ever-enlightening
Graham.
Yeah. So
no religious connotations, please.
Right. So I think we might be making a mistake here.
Oh.
Because we're going to be talking about two films at once today. So we're talking about the original 1962 King Kong vs. Godzilla and the 1963 US recut version. So I think this has potential to get a bit messy. Maybe it should have been two separate episodes, but we've committed now.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. I mean, they're similar, to say the least, right? So
yeah, I think the core of the story is the same.
Is this this is not the first time either that we have dealt with two altered versions either, is it? So
no, that's true. I do feel like this one differs the most. So it does feel.
I guess we'll get into it, but from its inception, it's come from like the Western side almost into, reinvigorating Godzilla in a way. Obviously we'll discuss all of that, but I think it's an interesting one of the differences being more sort of ingrained in a way, I suppose, and planned almost, you might say, whereas other movies are recut and they're sort of maybe more jigsaw puzzle piecey, or they ruin it a bit, but this one's a bit more interesting in that way. You could argue that one version or the other would be the version.
So I guess this episode is not Godzilla versus King Kong. It's 1962 versus 1963.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so this year, 2022, marks the 60th anniversary of King Kong versus Godzilla. So quite serendipitous timing there. So the original version is directed by Ishiro Honda again, and with Eiji Tsuburaya back on special effects. And the US cut is directed by Thomas Montgomery. So he directed the new additional scenes for the new recut English language US release. So I'll go over the plot, and I think I've managed to kind of phrase it in a way that it covers both films.
Right.
Without I've left out the stuff that isn't important, basically. I've left all the core points in there. But even so, this is quite a long synopsis, so buckle up. Okay. The chief of Pacific Pharmaceuticals, Mr. Tako, has this new natural psychoactive substance called pharolactin juice, or soma juice in the US version, which is from Faroe Island, which has a rumoured demon god, or mammoth evil spirit, depending on which translation you watch. And he wants to boost their TV ratings, so decides to promote the substance by using the so-called spirit of the island. So he sends out 2 employees on an expedition to gather data, one of whom is Osamu Sakurai. Sakurai returns home that evening to tell his sister Fumiko and her fiancé Kazuo about the expedition, but coincidentally, Kazuo is also going on an expedition of his own to test a new thread-like material that's stronger than steel on ships at sea. Yeah, strange.
Convenient, even.
Yes. Very convenient. We'll get into that. Once at Faroe Island, a giant octopus attacks the village, but Kong appears and fends it off. He then takes big swigs of the pharolactin juice that the villagers had been making, and then begins to pass out, with the villagers performing a song and dance ritual to help him fall asleep. Sakurai gets the idea to bring Kong back with them, so they miraculously build a raft to ship Kong back to Japan.
Well, I guess they knew they were going there to get some kind of monster, right?
They knew. Well, they didn't believe it existed. Well, Sakurai at least didn't.
But this pharmacy guy is like, he's funding it, so if he wants to...
He was like, oh yeah, there's some spirit there. They said gather data.
Okay, but they've certainly gathered it.
They certainly did. So meanwhile, Kazuo's own expedition gets the kibosh as there's an emergency at sea where the submarine called the Seahawk gets trapped in an iceberg that contains...
the guy... What's his name?
That big green guy. Godzilla. So this is picking up from the end of Godzilla Raids again.
Right, yes.
Where we saw him. Yeah, saw him buried in that
Stuck in the ice. The ice has been frozen for, 12 years or something like that?
7.
Oh, yeah, less than that. Yeah. Still pretty decent ice.
Yeah.
Don't make them like that anymore.
I think it broke free, because it was an island, wasn't it? Kamiko Island, and then maybe that he just broke free from that little bit and was just floating in the coldest regions. I don't know. Yeah, literally. So yeah, Godzilla ends up breaking free and makes landfall in Hokkaido. Mr. Tako gets increasingly annoyed at the rival network's exclusive coverage of the Seahawk incident because Godzilla is making the headlines and not Kong. But luckily for him, Kong breaks free from the raft and makes his way to Japan, where he encounters Godzilla. Naturally. Yeah. The two fight, but Kong retreats when he realizes he's not going to beat Godzilla's atomic breath. So the military come up with a plan to kill or at least fend off Godzilla using high voltage wires and a giant pit with poison gas to ensnare him. The pit failed to harm him, but the wires were enough to keep him at bay. Coincidentally, the wires had the opposite effect on Kong and seemed to charge him up. So Kong reaches Tokyo and picks up a moving train that Fumiko was riding to evacuate the city. Kong picks her out of the carriage and carries her up to the top of the National Diet Building. Sakurai and his colleague, I forget his name, Furue, I think, get the idea to save Fumi by spraying Kong with the ferrolactin juice and playing the song that the villagers perform to make him sleep. After he passes out, they rescue Fumi and decide that they can end all this by using Kazuo's magic string to airlift Kong to Godzilla's location and let them kill each other. Yeah, a very practical solution to this kind of problem. Yes, balloons and wire. So yeah, the two engage in battle on Mount Fuji, where Godzilla appears to be winning until lightning strikes Kong, charging him up and ultimately overpowering Godzilla. The two tumble off a cliff into the sea, where we then see Kong surface and return to Faro Island with Godzilla's fate unknown. So, yeah, that's the story. So when we watched this back in the day, we watched, I think this was we watched this and then we watched Godzilla 54, right? I can't quite remember how we came to, what order we watched them in, because this, for me, was the first time I'd seen a Japanese Godzilla movie. I mentioned in the previous episode that I'd been binging King Kong films back in 2005. So you must have seen it before me, and then I watched it with you. Because it was in the DVD set that I had got King Kong with, so I watched it from there, and then we watched it together, and I think from there, you then gifted me the DVD of the original Godzilla movie, and that's how our kind of prolonged viewing has started, and that was back in 2008. So when we first saw it, I probably had seen it once and then we watched it together, so it's pretty much same time more or less. So on that disc, because my memory is quite fuzzy, my memory was it was the American cut we watched on that disc, but was it the American cut or was it the Japanese cut? It is the American cut. Right, okay. It's a universal released set because it's all King Kong stuff, and even King Kong's Escape, or King Kong Escapes rather, that's in there is the American version of that as well. So I didn't see the Japanese version until, same as you, on the Criterion collection that we both have for the Showa era. I find this Criterion set quite odd. I might go on a little bit of a tangent already, but the fact that this Japanese version is hidden away on the bonus disc must be something to do with rights or something. I don't know. It's all speculation, but like maybe there's some stipulation that, including King Kong versus Godzilla, you must present the American version as the primary version, and there's something in that perhaps, because there's no reason they wouldn't just be on the same disc. And the set doesn't include any other American versions, does it? It's got King of the Monsters 56. Okay, but even so, but it doesn't have Gigantis, for example. Yeah, it's only two of the 8 movies are doubled up in that way, and so it's a strange kind of unexplained choice. Yeah, it's really odd.
But if you watch the set from start to finish, they would all present in their Japanese form except for this one, right?
Yeah, really strange. So yeah, I mean, you could absolutely miss that unless you're looking at the titles on the disc, really. Anyway, so yeah, the film King Kong versus Godzilla. So we get lots of sort of threads that intertwine. You get the Pacific Pharmaceuticals. They want Kong for their ads. They send Sakurai to get him. He's the brother of Fumi, the one that Kong captured. She's engaged to Kazuo, who's testing this string that they use to airlift Kong. Mm-hmm. There's so much going on, but it's not really saying that much, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, considering it has a large part of the creative team from the original Godzilla, it's the first like major departure, I guess, from the sort of reverence of Godzilla's sort of inception. And the same for Kong, really. Like, this movie does not present itself as the same sort of artistic or even technical, achievement that King Kong can be considered to be. It's a straight up comedy, right, from the start. The effects are almost deliberately sort of not as high spec as the other movies, and it seems like their main intent with making it was just to kind of have a laugh with these two characters rather than say anything as such.
Yeah, so it felt needlessly complicated for quite a simple idea.
Yeah,
I think that was the I think the most glaring issue with the story for me. So yeah, I mean, it is silly fun, like no question about that. It's good fun, but there's just things that you feel like should be important in a story. Like, so for example, this string that Kazuo is working on.
Yeah.
Like, it feels like this is going to be a big plot point. And so, they had this whole string side story in place, essentially, just in case we couldn't suspend our disbelief of Kong being lifted by normal rope. It's like, was that its sole purpose? Because I was like, oh, they're going to use it to electrify Kong later, or they're going to use it I thought they were going to use it on the high tension wires to keep Godzilla away, or they were going to use it to trip him up or choke him or something. It felt like it was going to be this is going to be the thing that ends it all. But it was just something to airlift Kong. And it's like, there's a surprising amount of focus on this thread, literally. That it just seemed like, oh, was that all it was for?
I don't think it's a deliberate thing, because this movie came about very early on in the history of the James Bond series, but you could liken this to the way James Bond gets given a very sort of obtuse gadget and then they contrive a reason for it to exist,
Yeah.
But I think in both versions of the movie, it's done as a deliberate sort of joke in itself. It's just like, this thread is really strong, and they're like amazed by it, and they're showing it off in the opening scenes where he's like hanging over the side of the balcony and like scaring the other guy, like, because he's showing how strong it is. He's not going to it's not going to fall and all this. And I think it is supposed to be that, it in the end, it's used for a pretty insignificant thing in a way that's just a silly visual of Kong being airlifted. I think it's supposed to be a funny thing. In the movie, it has quite a lot of jokes in it which are more overt, and I think it's funnier than a lot of the other Godzilla movies we've watched, where we've commented on the fact they've got comedy in, but it's just not our taste, or it comes with an odd tone which is arguably deliberate but maybe also not sometimes.
Yeah, because like Raid's had a bit of a funny tone to it. It's like, am I supposed to be laughing at these moments that seem objectively sad? I don't know. It's yeah.
But there are parts in this where I actually had a little chuckle.
Yeah,
and I was like, that's usually I don't really see the humor in things. Not that I don't think it's funny, but like, as I say, it's not my kind of thing. But this that has a couple of jokes, and I was like, that's actually still holds up even 60 years later.
Yeah, okay, I thought the same. And when I was watching it, I was like, Graham's not going to find that funny.
Well, when I first watched it as a teenager, I had a fascination with Godzilla, but hadn't actually seen any. I didn't really know that it was supposed to be deliberately funny. Obviously, it is silly, but I don't think I had like the presence of mind to be like...
to like process the jokes that they were making, kind of thing.
No, I think as an adolescent, I was too preoccupied with my own presumptions to kind of see that, they're not playing it completely straight, and it is a confusing thing, because like I was just saying before, with how King Kong and Godzilla start from quite, I wouldn't say lofty, but there is like a ambition to say something of meaning, and the Godzilla movie especially is still quite haunting now, as we talked about. And that's just the guy in a suit. And then the same director makes this movie, and it is pretty much just taking the piss out of that whole thing. So it is a strange thing. And as watching it now as an adult, and I think it's probably about 17 years since I watched it when I was about 17. I can't do the maths, but I watched it probably with a more, not, I wouldn't say good faith as such, because I've always enjoyed it and I've always really liked it and have always found it funny, but I watched it more like funny on its own terms this time, rather than kind of laughing at it, which I think when I was younger, that is sort of what I was doing. Yeah, so you kind of willfully not taking in the jokes because you're more preoccupied with trying to find it funny in your own way. Yeah, like, oh, the effects are bad, and like, oh, it's aged, or like, oh, the fights are silly, and kind of laughing. Oh, the dub is terrible, etc. Yeah, I mean, the dub, I guess, is maybe not so much a deliberate thing. But well, yeah, there are as in like that's the thing you find funny when you're watching it. Before. Potentially, yeah. And there are a couple of lines where you're just like, that is really poorly translated and is still kind of like humorous in a way, even. But there's even special effects shots, especially when the giant octopus turns up, where I'm like, there's no way they knew. There's no way they didn't know this looks like silly. It must be on purpose. Even from the 1960s, I think they were deliberately sort of mocking the whole thing, even though, like I say, they'd done it earnestly not that long before. Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. So the studio, they specifically wanted a family fun kind of goofy comedy, and like you say, the comedy still holds up, and I think it does in both versions. The American comedy is funny and the Japanese comedy is funny in both, right? So they were pretty adamant, it'd be just a good time for all the family. There is a specific element I would point out as not funny that I probably should, we should probably mark before we get too deep into it, that there's the tribe they go to see on the island where Kong is all kind of like painted face stuff that is not amusing to me. We'll cover that when we get to the characters. Yeah, just to say, like, that one part of it is much like the sexism you talked about last episode. It's a bit uncomfortable, to say the least. Yeah, so when I say we found it funny, we're not talking about that part of it. No. I'll say we'll bring that up later. So with this, Honda was specifically, he was kind of against the idea of it being like kiddie funny. He wanted that whole satire of Japanese television commercialism. Right. So he worked with Shinichi Sekizawa, the screenwriter, to develop that theme. He did adopt the tonal shift that this film took, but I think the studio, they wanted something kind of like off the wall funny, and he wanted something more satirical. And the more they want overt comedy, he wants like a sort of satire. Yeah, exactly. You said the same thing. So it's kind of funny though, because I mean the sole reason for this film exists is just to be a commercial success, because Kong was a popular character at the time and they wanted to capitalize on that. So it's kind of there's this weird dichotomy between what Honda wanted to achieve and what the studio wanted from the movie. Yeah, it does feel like it's about itself in some way. Yeah, it does. It's interesting. How much of that's intentional, I don't know, but in any case, it's quite interesting thing to see. So when I watched it a couple of days ago for this, I didn't know or recall knowing about this sort of TV satire about the cynicism that was being applied to the way networks behaved at this time in Japan at all. I wasn't aware of that. And I kind of had a curiosity that the talking about kind of exploiting Kong for ratings was a sort of self-referential thing to do with character rights. It does, yeah. I feel like maybe Honda had kind of cottoned onto that, because I mean there's that one scene, I can't remember if it's in the American cut or not, it might be, where they bring Kong back and then they're like, someone says, oh, I wonder who would win in a fight between Godzilla and Kong,
And like, then he's like, oh, this isn't a wrestling match. But then Taco comes out and he's like, oh, but what if it is, kind of thing, you know?
Yeah.
And like, he's like, let's make this a big thing. And it is that kind of self-referential. Maybe that's not the term. It's kind of,
I think that is the term.
Yeah, like a self-referential
it's like
kind
meta comedy, if you want to use that different phrasing.
Yeah.
I think, meta comedy is a separate, broader term, perhaps.
But it does seem like he kind of, tapped into that, which is, I suppose in a way ahead of its time.
That's the thing. It's there intentionally or not. I certainly felt that when I was watching it. If that isn't what they were saying, fair enough. But it's the comments sort of made. It's interpreted however you as the viewer like, and it feels like it as time's gone by. And I don't know what Japanese TV is like or how people feel about it these days necessarily. But the lingering sort of notion of the story seems to be more self-referential than maybe it was intended, or maybe it was. But it's a funny angle, I think, and it's something that you see a lot these days, I think, in comedies where they sort of make fun of themselves.
Yeah.
Or there's a cynicism.
Yes.
I won't go off on a tangent about this, but anybody who saw the recent fourth Matrix movie will know exactly what I mean. That in that they spend a lot of time openly berating quite. What's the word I'm looking for?
Substantially.
They're very combative about the notion of a fourth Matrix movie, and you're watching it.
Right.
And I really enjoyed that because I never really wanted there to be a fourth Matrix, but I went to see it out of curiosity, and I enjoyed the notion that they'd been made to produce it under duress and had done everything they can to ruin it on purpose, and they did a very good job of doing that. And Kong versus Godzilla doesn't do that as such, but it's the same sort of
there's hints of it, at least.
A creator doing something which maybe they don't want to do and sabotaging it to some degree in the process on purpose is an interesting experience.
I mean, it's not exclusive to film either, I don't think. I think Creedence Clearwater Revival, their last album, I think they were contractually obliged to do one last one, and it's awful. And like, so it's horrendous. And I think part of it was intentional. This film has a whole new messaging that there's almost no trace of the original messaging of the previous two films. So Godzilla 54 and Raids Again.
Or King Kong, I guess.
Or King Kong, yeah. There's a mention of the H-bomb when they're thinking, how can we take out Godzilla? There's a mention of that. They touch on global warming a little bit because, that science show at the beginning, they're talking about this iceberg that's melting. And
can you believe they've been talking about global warming for so long, and nothing's been done about it?
It's worse than it's ever been.
They're saying that in this movie. It's like 60 years old. Yeah.
It's sad. It's a sad state of affairs. People should be watching more Godzilla movies. Maybe things would have been different.
If they would just watch King Kong versus Godzilla.
So the pacing in this film is, I feel, quite different between the two versions.
Oh, yes.
So although in both versions, it's still a whole hour before you see them fight. But
yes, but correct me if I'm wrong, isn't it an awfully long time before you see either of the monsters in the Japanese one?
Yeah, it is. So the US one, Godzilla, he's almost right at the start. First few scenes, he's on land.
That is what you want.
That is exactly what you want. Yes, exactly. You need something just to kind of, jab between the eyes, wake you up and go, right, what's happening? But there's a lot of tension in the build up to the Kong reveal. And I wonder if they're trying to channel the 1933 King Kong in that way, where
it's been a while, I guess, hasn't it? So they're like,
there's enough times elapsed that it can be tense again. So you don't see him until that octopus attacks, which is I can't remember how far into the movie it is, but it's quite a long way through. And that's the first time you see either of them.
Anything happen?
Anything happen? Yeah, it's when the octopus attacks, which was referenced in Skull Island, I think. When
he eats an octopus.
He eats the octopus. Yeah.
I have to say, when I was watching the Japanese version, and the octopus turned up.
Yes.
I felt a little bit taunted because I was just like clock watching for the actual, the stars of the show to turn up, and they put this octopus in front of you. The effects aren't good, as we already talked about. And I'm like, where the flipping King Kong and Godzilla? I was getting so antsy. I feel like I was being made fun of by the movie by putting a different monster in it.
That's, yeah. Again, I wonder if they're trying to do that whole 1933 thing where they're on this island, they're seeing the other monsters, and then they see Kong. Yeah. That's probably what they're doing, but then...
I think they want you to feel like it's the same place or something like that.
Yeah, maybe, but...
They don't say Skull Island at any point, do they?
No, it's Faroe Island. Yeah. It's a different location as well. So, yeah. But the US did away with all that kind of tension building because I think, I guess they knew, at least with Western audiences, they know Godzilla, they know Kong. So they're like, well, let's do away with that. Let's, no fluff. So well, actually, not to jump on your point, but like King Kong, yes, but Godzilla, I know that they released Godzilla and obviously they've got the whole Steve Martin thing, which we covered at length. Yeah.
Godzilla is known in America, but not to the same degree as Kong, I would think. And maybe they thought a lot of people are coming to this movie for the Godzilla cachet, the Western audience. Let's put it right at the start.
So that you know who Godzilla is.
Yeah, and I think the idea of walking out of cinemas has kind of plateaued many decades ago, but back in the 60s...
I'd still do it, I think.
I've wanted to do it on a couple of occasions. I've never done it myself.
Right.
I'm just saying that back when the cinema wouldn't have cost that much, potentially.
Yeah, just a nickel.
You probably would have been like, no Godzilla for an hour.
Yeah.
You're out of there, mate.
Yeah.
So maybe it's a false presumption, but maybe they thought Western audiences would not be as patient as Japanese audiences, or maybe it was just viewed as a general flaw of the Japanese cut. I'm not actually sure about that.
I would say the latter, because it's such a long time, and
too long.
And considering Godzilla has second billing, I don't know. It feels like you've almost forgotten about him by that point. By the time he actually appears, it's a bit strange. It feels like it feels like what it is. It's a Kong movie, and Godzilla's in it. And I felt the same way about Godzilla vs. Kong 2021, but that felt like more of a Kong movie in the same way that this does.
The modern movie is definitely Kong as the protagonist, yeah. And I think Godzilla is a better antagonist, regardless of which version of this pairing you look at, because he's the more intimidating creature, I think.
Yeah.
And maybe that's just like a kind of a...
He doesn't seem to have any specific emotional sentiment, like with Kong. I mean, as we talked about, he likes the ladies. He has this he has this kind of I suppose more of an emotional side.
He's got a human element to it. Well, it's naturally that you would see him as a more relatable figure because he's just a mammal, I guess. And then there's this big fire-breathing lizard comes, and that's a bit more frightening in a way. Godzilla doesn't have a sad face expression, whereas in the modern Godzilla vs. Kong looks pretty put out by the whole experience. Yeah. And you feel for him. So, I think that you could say that 62, 63 version is a Kong movie. I've not really thought about it so much, but I guess Kong is the driving force behind the plot from the beginning, really, with the berries, and then Kong needs to fight Godzilla kind of to get rid of Godzilla. So same sort of thing as the new one. He's in a sort of a more protagonistic position.
Yeah.
But I guess I've got a bias as much that because I think of it now as part of the Showa era. I think of it as a Godzilla first, and even when I had it in my King Kong DVD set, like I said when we first saw it, I was watching it as a Godzilla film.
Yeah.
And when I watched King Kong Escapes, which, won't get too far into on this episode, but even that, I was just like, this doesn't really feel like Kong because it was so Japanese. It feels like a different thing. So I guess it depends on what perspective you have of the whole production and what things you associate with which creature and which character or whatever.
Yeah. Okay, well, as we're sort of talking about the characters in a way, let's talk about the characters. So it felt like there was like 50 characters in this film, especially the Japanese version. Actually, no, I think because I watched them both next to each other.
You can just binge them one after the other, back and forth, over and over all week long.
I did like Japanese, American. And I feel like my brain's just been bombarded with just so much stuff. And I feel like I've forgotten all of it as a result.
Overwhelmed with information.
Yeah, completely. There's just so many characters. And it's like, what do you all do? But okay, so you mentioned earlier about the troubling aspect of this film, which is the blackface. So I suppose, yeah, because they were the Solomon Island natives. So rather than getting oceanic people to play the part, they had presumably Japanese people playing that role, but blacked up.
Yeah.
Now, I think, so this could probably cover our thoughts on every single Godzilla movie that does this, but like I think preservation and presentation of these is fine with adequate context, and I think I spoke to you ages ago about this, and you were saying how it should be labeled on the disc or on the box in some way, or
before the film starts, maybe a little title card pops up.
Remember that? Something like that. Something like that, because I remember that Looney Tunes box set you had on DVD. That had, there was an intro by Whoopi Goldberg, right?
Yes, some of the Looney Tunes DVDs I have include racial stereotypes from the era. And some of them have the title card, which is just presented as they were for preservation's sake and for cultural sensitivity. They don't want to cut out the racism now because that makes it seem like it never happened, And as you say, there's another disc which has actually Whoopi Goldberg comes on and does basically a speech to that effect of just there's some racist stuff here. It's not very amusing by today's cultural standard, but we can't pretend it didn't happen. And there is a value to it in a way of keeping it. So neither of us are advocating that they should cut these Godzilla movies, but we just feel like you should kind of be forewarned a little bit that there is some uncomfortable scenes in there, and that's all there is really. I think that's, it's not any more complicated than that really. That people should just be kind of taken care of whilst they try to enjoy a Godzilla movie. Yeah, it's not a bad thing. Yeah,
and I've really found that with that Looney Tunes thing specifically, that really stuck with me. That line of by not including it, it's like pretending it didn't exist.
Yeah, and you're kind of almost excusing it in a way. It's like, oh, well, they didn't mean it, or we're just going to pretend that didn't happen. It's like, well, it still happens now. But the Criterion Collection neglects to include such a warning on any of its movies about this.
Doesn't say it anywhere, does it?
Yeah, and that is the only thing that I think both of us found irksome. The content, as you say, should be preserved as it is, as a historical artifact, if nothing else, regardless of whether or not you consider it to be entertaining. The movie as a whole, I mean, not those particular scenes. I would argue that at the time of production, they were very unimaginative about this because they are going to a fictional location.
This is what got me, because it's like, you could have, a fictional location. So you could have whatever islander you want. You could pretend they were of East Asian descent.
You could have blue people living there.
Blue people.
It doesn't matter. That they it's this notion of, it doesn't really matter, or it's not really important, or whose feelings are we really hurting, and that sort of glibness that, as we say, is still kind of present in modern day culture, sadly, and was obviously much more acceptable in the past, is what the movie is guilty of perpetuating. So it's a shame.
It is a shame.
It doesn't go on for too long, and I wouldn't want to...
I feel like it did.
Well, it does go on longer in the Japanese cut, I think, actually.
Well, I have watched them 4 times now, so it does feel like a bit
gone on longer for you.
Saturated.
I would, if I was speaking to somebody who was particularly sensitive to this, for any reason, I would say it doesn't really detract from the film's enjoyment, because if that's going to be the thing that turns you off this film, and fair enough if it does, you're probably going to have an issue with lots of other things about it and movies of that era. Like you talk about the sexism, which is present in King Kong 33. There is still lots of sexism, even in the 90s and noughties Godzilla movies. So I think that people who are of a ability to avoid this sort of stuff would not find it... They wouldn't be hugely put out by me saying, don't watch it if you're going to find that upsetting, because they probably already know that. They don't need me to tell them. I don't need you to tell them that.
Potentially, I suppose.
But I do still think there should be a warning there so that everybody can sort of learn about it.
That's the thing. I think part of it's expectation. If you're expecting this stuff when you're going in, then
it's much different than being surprised by it.
Exactly. So as characters go, there's so many. Let's just talk about the main ones, really. So you got Mr. Tako, who's played by Ichiro Arihima. So he's like this eccentric capitalist pharmacy guy.
Probably the most cartoony of the characters, really.
Yeah, definitely. And he comes across a lot more aggressive in the US cut, I thought. He's but in the Japanese cut, he's more, he is, a greedy capitalist. That's a bit of redundancy there, greedy capitalist. Let's just say capitalist. He's annoying, but he's a good character.
He's more in the Japanese version, if I recall correctly. He has sort of almost like a kind of more pathetic sort of.
Definitely,
he's like very sort of like pitiful.
Yeah.
And kind of gross in a way that he's not so much in the American one. Where he's more. They cut it in a way
Stroppy.
where he's presented, more eccentric and more sort of single-minded. So much as he's not so much as greedy, you would say. Perhaps they have nullified that capitalist critique a little bit, knowingly or not.
Yeah,
it's a little less grimy in the American one, but the brevity helps the comedy a bit because he's not his character's not so drawn out. You can enjoy the humor.
Yeah, that's true. I do find that he is a funnier character in the Japanese version, though.
Oh,
because
right.
you see more of the nuance of his character, I think. Because you spend a bit more time with him, you kind of see that he's not quite as caricature-ish as he is in the American one.
I think I felt the other way round just because the American one is a more pacey film.
Right.
So you move from one thing to the next a little bit faster, and it helps the jokes kind of come and go, and it feels like punchy, and I like that notion to it. They're the same jokes effectively, but pace is everything to me with these. So
that's fair. So I guess he works in both versions.
Yeah, it depends on your perspective, doesn't it?
Yeah, he was my favorite character. When I first watched it, I was like, oh, this guy. I was like, nah, I don't like you straight away.
I remember you hating this character when we first watched this.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't remember that.
Yeah, you really didn't not in like a, you enjoyed not liking it, I think, but
right.
He has these little mini freakouts throughout the movie about not getting his own way, and you finding it sort of legitimately annoying, I think. But maybe you've been softened by watching more Godzilla movies since.
Yeah, maybe I've calmed down since then. Then we've got who I think is kind of I guess this guy's the main character, I would say. Osamu Sakurai. He's played by Tadao Takashima. So he's the cameraman, I guess. I think that's his job for the Pacific Pharmaceuticals Company.
He goes outside his job description for this. But that is his thing. He films King Kong when they first see him, right?
I think they in the Japanese version, they kind of make reference to the fact that he's filling holes in the company because he's in one of the commercials as a drummer. Becomes like an everyman problem solver type employee. Yeah, exactly. So we'll send him to go look for Kong, and he goes with the other guy, Furue, I think. I'm not sure who the actor was.
I'll be honest with this though, right? This other character who he goes to the island with, there's two guys there.
Yep.
And I always forget through absent-mindedness that's not the fiance character who's same. I always just feel like, oh yeah, like of course, because they felt like they were buddy, and they had that same dynamic between them. Yeah. And you kind of just I'm just not paying attention enough, or maybe it speaks to my own racial bias in not recognizing this is actually a different person that you're looking at. But, I don't know whether it's a racial thing, because there's so many white actors who I think are the same people. Yeah, all the big white actors of the current era look basically the same, all the Hollywood ones. People make fun of me for getting people confused. I'm like, I literally thought they were the same person. If you're not watching basically the MCU, you wouldn't know the one from the other. So yeah, I totally sympathize with that. But yeah, even watching it this week, I had that notion of like, oh, that isn't the guy. Yeah, that's not the fiance. And as I was having that thought, I was like, and you thought this last time you watched it. But the thing that makes me always realize that the fiance is obviously doing something else is because when he comes home. And they have that scene where his neighbor realizes he's not dead. She drops the dinner plate on the balcony, right? She's like, oh my God, you're not dead. Yeah. Good scene. Why is where's she taking that food? I think she was taking it to Fumiko. Oh, what, to console her? Yeah, because she was like, oh, take your mind off your troubles. Okay. She couldn't cook in a grieving state. Maybe that was it. Because I was just like, why is she eating? What's she doing? She's carrying a dinner plate around. Walking about with food. Just to drop it was the...
Yeah, it could have literally been anything, but food was a specific choice.
So you probably had more to say about Sakurai.
I didn't have any more to say.
We'll move on to the other.
I felt like he was the main character, basically. He felt like the main guy.
And I will say that he's an enjoyable presence. I like, even with the dub on the American version, I feel like the character is, so many of the human characters in many of the Godzilla movies can become a bit of abrasive and irritating. To me anyway.
Right.
And he's not. I quite like the characters, and I do think, as I said before, I think they're quite funny, and I think they work well. And the performances are of a type, but it works.
The actual actor or the dubbing or both?
The acting.
Right.
I mean, the dub is easy to criticise for its age and its general approach, but I think the actors are doing a comedic performance in this, and you can say like, oh well, it's not that convincing sometimes, is it? But like the special effects are also deliberately silly, so I don't think that's what they were going for. So you can see that all of the actors are doing a pretty good job of what they do, and I think it's a really fun performance from all of them. Really,
I completely agree. They really sold the comedic aspect well.
Yeah,
and in a convincing way. I think especially on the boat when they're shipping back Kong. There's that little kind of, with the dynamite plunger, and Tako is kind of about to press it, and their whole interaction between Sakurai, Tako, and the friend Furue.
I can remember you shouting at the TV during that.
Oh my god, what was I saying?
You were like,
was I drunk?
You were like, is he stupid? I can't believe it. Stop touching it, like stuff like that.
I was clearly not understanding the comedy at the time. I guess I hadn't reached that point yet.
Well, we were having a fun time. But
I definitely remember enjoying it.
Yeah.
Wow, I don't remember any of that. Interesting. So yeah, we've got Fumiko Sakurai. So she's played by Mia Hama. So she's Osamu's sister, and she's basically the scream queen of this. She's the one who should stop taking trains, really, because every time she gets on a train, something bad happens. Godzilla will appear, Kong will appear.
It's a fair argument to say that it's less prevalent than the racism in this movie. There is inherent sexism to that character just sort of being there.
Yeah,
but I do like the way they sort of recreate some classic Kong moments with her, and it does. I mean, all she is like a screaming woman, which I think is obviously reductive in its way. But still, I like, she's on the train, and that's reminiscent of the Kong train scene. And then they have the yellow dress on her, and she's the one that Kong carries. And it's like, oh yeah, it has a point to it. It is still inherently sexist, not because of them doing that with her, but because that's all she does is really what makes it a bit of a problem, I suppose. But it still serves the movie, and it is fun to watch.
Yes. I mean, I only noticed because on our last recording for King Kong 1933, you mentioned how you saw the dress, right?
Well, in the colorized version.
Oh, in the colorized, it was yellow.
It's yellow, and it's also yellow on the 1933 posters.
Yes. So, I mean, the only reason I noticed that was because of what you told me last time. So I saw that and I was like, oh, I see, they're referencing that moment, which I thought was quite cool. Because Fumi, she specifically changes her outfit at that point because it's cut out of the US one, but they're debating whether or not to evacuate because they're like, well, Godzilla might not actually come here, and then they're like, oh, sorry, Kong might not actually come here, and then like seconds later they're like, Kong's here. They're like, okay, let's go, and then the next shot she's in a different dress. So yeah, it was specifically for that moment.
I also like the bit in relation to evacuation. One of my favorite bits is when I'm assuming it's a deliberate edit, but it may not be, when they're talking about evacuating and they bump into this woman and her little boy on the balcony, right?
Oh yeah.
And like, what are you doing? Like, where are you going? Something like that. And it just like hard cuts to the kids saying, Godzilla. And it's like so like jarring when you first see it, but it works well, like, because it's kind of like, I guess they are escaping from Godzilla, but
I think isn't that, oh, maybe that's different in the US one.
It might be. It's the dubbing as well is what part of what makes it funny. So that, yeah.
So with Fumi being in the yellow dress and being carried around by Kong, apparently RKO, when they licensed out King Kong, they were like, you've got to have Kong pick up a woman and take her up a building.
Not surprised to hear that.
So that was specifically why that was there. So yeah, her appearance was probably solely based on that.
People are so myopic, aren't they?
Well, yeah, you're right. You are absolutely right. I get why they're saying it. It's like brand identity, isn't it, in a way? They're like, this is on brand for Kong, he likes the ladies, he takes them off a building. And it's like, it's myopic. I completely agree, but I get why they said it.
The thing with it, though, is like, does he climb the Tokyo Diet, the National Diet building to get away from anybody? No, they've made it so that him taking a woman and climbing up somewhere, and the diet building is not even that tall in relation.
It's like standing on a table.
Yeah, for Kong it is totally. I mean, in real world terms, how tall do you think it is? Maybe like 40 stories, maybe. Not even that.
Not even.
We drove past it one day, didn't we, when we were in Japan?
Probably.
Yeah, we talked about it.
God, what? I'm not remembering any of this. I'm glad you're here to fill in the gaps in my life's history.
It's a small building, so
it's a small building.
I don't know why Kong would climb it, and this is kind of what I'm saying about RKO. Getting really off topic, but when they say like, he has to pick up a woman and climb up a building, they're kind of missing the point of why he originally did that, and they're making it like this kind of it's a character trait based on what motivation. It's just what Kong does because it's in his nature to grab women and climb buildings. In the original movie, that's part of the story that he likes, and Arrow, and he takes her up the building to escape all the commotion. It makes sense, he doesn't just do it because it's his thing.
It's like, I suppose, like if you think of like any famous musician, for example, they have a hit song.
Yeah,
audiences expect it. Now, I think with movies, I think a lot of like RKO, for example, they'll be like, well, people are expecting it. We've got snow globes with Kong on the Empire State. We've got Christmas decorations to sell with Kong climbing.
Yellow dresses.
Yeah, they've got all of that, and they're gonna capitalize on it. And they're like, well, this is his thing.
That makes a lot of sense.
This incidental moment is his thing now.
Why not have him climb like a fictional pagoda, but like a really big one then? And do something really impressive. Why have him climb a small building? I think
part of the enjoyment, maybe I'm taking this too seriously, but I think part of it is maybe Japanese audiences, they like seeing, I know I would like seeing,
what, King Kong on Big Ben?
Yeah. If he comes to London, I don't want it to be on a fictional building. I'll be like,
But like a pagoda is like a Japanese thing. Maybe that's a reductive way to look at it as well. I don't know.
But I suppose maybe they were hoping for the same kind of iconicness of the Empire State. It's like, well, here's the National Diet building, where they do all the food.
I just want to look up how tall it is just quickly, because I think it's important for people who may have not seen or can't remember the film. Just how big is this building? So Kong, he's like, 45 meters tall? Well, he sort of changes height within this movie. So the National Diet building, which is in Tokyo, Japan, is 65 meters tall.
Okay.
Which I would say is probably about the same height that King Kong is supposed to be in this film. And I'm thinking about, just as we've been talking, this notion has occurred to me that this is maybe an intentional joke in itself that I've just overlooked, that yes, the building is small. Why is he going up there?
I think it's probably the most iconic building in Japan at the time, or at least Tokyo.
That's why I feel like they could have done a pagoda, because they smash a pagoda later on.
Oh, that castle, the Atami castle.
And it's like they could have just done that and maybe just made it look like, I don't know, a bit bigger, or he tries to climb it and it like topples over or something funny like that. I don't know.
I think they wanted to sell some T-shirts with Kong on the National Diet building.
You're right. It's like, this is like, we want the audience to see something that they recognise, and I guess they would recognise this. And Tokyo, despite its like metropolistic nature, is not known for tall buildings during this time. I mean, when was the Tokyo Tower built? Surely that was around.
When we went to Tokyo, wasn't it like an anniversary?
It was.
I'm trying to think what anniversary.
It was opened in 1958. So why didn't he just climb?
That would have been a good one.
Similarly to the Empire State, it would have been recently built, easy to popularise. Maybe it wasn't popular when it was built. I mean, it's an iconic thing now, this red and white tower. Obviously, a lot of people know it.
Yeah.
These days, you would have to do the Sky Tree. But the idea that they would have this kind of Eiffel Tower facsimile and not use it, and they used the Diet building.
It doesn't look as good, and it's small.
The Diet, you mean?
Yeah, the Diet building.
No, that's what.
It's
we're saying
poor choice.
They fucked it 60 years ago.
Sorry, guys. Yeah.
I'm going to take it that it's kind of like a gag, perhaps, and especially that the government is involved in some way. That it's some sort of like humorous, like, oh, he's climbing like the Houses of Parliament, effectively, you know.
Yeah.
Isn't that humorous? I guess
that's
so.
it. Yeah. But, we'll chalk it up to that.
The other thing I was going to say on this point is just like this notion that we must have Kong do the same thing can also be read from a direction of making movies like this, comedy movies with King Kong and Godzilla, in some way damages the legacy of their original installments, which is a pretty big debate in a way.
Because it just cartoonifies it.
It can cartoonify it, yeah. And if you boil characters down like that to make their iconic activities just the things they do without reason, that can have an impact of just like, what is the point of this? Like Darth Vader is a really classic example of this, and probably the most significant example you could use to say, like, when a character has been introduced as a pretty frightening figure and over a series of decades become less and less impactful to the point where, unless you're a diehard Star Wars fan, it's pretty much meaningless. Like Darth Vader's breath and his presence and his like stature and all the voice and that have been used in so many different ways now for larks and like jokes or, you know, theme park things. It's just like, it's hard, at least for me, and I think a lot of other people, when you see Darth Vader as on the cereal box for like some Cocoa Pops thing, it's like, this guy's not as scary.
Yeah.
But in some instances, like I said, I would say that I agree that Darth Vader has been sort of castrated, if you will, over the years. But with Godzilla versus King Kong, it's interesting that actually it's the original director of Godzilla who's approached this movie and made it with their own intent in mind. And when a lot of people kind of come to this and say, oh, it's kind of lowered the tone of Godzilla or King Kong, and it's kind of like cartoonified it, as you say, it's like, well, it's still part of the same like sort of school of thinking from the same people. It's just a different interpretation. And I know this criticism was leveled against King of the Monsters, the modern MonsterVerse movie, when they did a lot of kind of stuff with the action, with the nuclear stuff, that I think people sort of took issue with that because it was Americans adapting Godzilla. The nuclear element became more of a spectacle than a kind of a topic of discussion, you know, that it was a bit trite and insensitive to its Japanese origins. But this becomes like a very complex issue, because then it's like, well, the Japanese producers made their serious drama horror movie about the bombings that occurred, and Godzilla is created out of that, and all the lucky dragon boat things that we talked about. And then they go on to make all these comedies, and Godzilla is mostly now, overwhelmingly, it's mostly a comedic, family-friendly thing.
Yeah.
So it's just interesting to look at stuff and hear people saying, oh, this has really lowered the tone of this, when actually...
But who said that it's lowered the tone?
I think critically, and the creators of Kong were not pleased with this because of it.
Oh, I see. Oh, with Kong specifically, sorry.
Well, that's one example.
Right.
I think just generally, I think people do look at Godzilla's sort of demise, if you will, into family-friendly comedies as like a bit of a fall from grace from like this like very lofty, like deeply reverent drama that we, you know, in the original movie. But my point is that if it's come from the original source, whether it be like the original director, writer in Honda, or just Toho, or if that's just what Japanese people are enjoying, clearly Godzilla is popular. He was popular from his outset as a horrific figure, and he still is popular as a intimidating, you know, monster, but he's also been enjoyed as a family-friendly cartoon character. It's like, it's criticism that's not really always valid to me, because although I agree that there are a lot of bad Godzilla movies and there are a lot of good ones, and it's a shame when one can sometimes tarnish the other, there's room for everything to exist in harmony, depending on what kind of mood you're in or what the audience is, and it can be for more than just one group of people. And I don't feel like making this King Kong versus Godzilla movie has in any way damaged King Kong 1933. It's too big a cultural thing for them to damage 33, and likewise with Godzilla as well. So I think it's fine to make an outright comedy like this and be really, really silly.
I think so. I mean,
it's separate, you know.
Yeah, I think with maybe not so much Kong, but especially with Godzilla, is that even though, you know, his genesis was through something horrific, as we've talked about before, the best Godzilla stories are when there's like where he's a vehicle for a message, or that those tend to be the better ones.
Ideologies and ethoses and things like that.
And so, like, you know, there's room for him to be a vehicle for something funny. You know, I think his character especially is adaptable. You know, not adaptable, but malleable to whatever you want it to be. If there's something you really want to say, Godzilla's a good vehicle to do that. Maybe, I think maybe against Kong, not so much, because there wasn't really a specific, I don't know. I suppose that could apply to Kong as well. I mean, I wouldn't say it's harmed his reputation in any way.
No, if anything, it's kept it alive. Not that it was ever really going to diminish. I mean, in this time now, it's hard to imagine there not being a King Kong, or for that to ever to fall away into some kind of obscurity. But I can't imagine this hurt at all. Really. No. But I don't think these specific characters suffer. I think that's actually kind of their strength in a way. You shouldn't be overly protective and keep things in a box where they just do one thing over and over and never change, because that becomes boring. You should be open to the risk of, like, what if Kong did something different? And I think, you know, that is actually why Godzilla vs. Kong, the modern movie, is so good, because you get to see these characters revitalized in like CG with like modern action, and it doesn't take away at all from the cultural importance of like King Kong 1933, because they're so separated by time and, you know, media.
I wonder if there's a fear from at least RKO's point of view that it could end up looking like a Japanese property. It could look like a, you know, so there needs to be that callback to his origins, which is an RKO thing. And they're like, we don't want you to forget that. Like, yeah, he's in this Toho movie, but don't forget, you know, where he came from. And maybe that's the reason why they're being so protective over this idea of, you know, this iconic moment, or, you know, whatever. So they don't want his character or his behavior even to change.
It's maintaining that brand identity.
Yeah, because if it ends up being a huge movie like it is or was, you know, people might associate King Kong with that specific iteration, and, you know, that could undercut what RKO have achieved or want people to remember them for, you know.
Yeah, you could argue that RKO was trying to protect its financial interests at a time when the company was virtually non-existent by that point as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's interesting that if you had been lucky enough to see King Kong 1933 multiple times and then went to see King Kong versus Godzilla, you would just be seeing Kong do the same thing over and over. And I can't see how that is. We know from repetition in media, and again, Star Wars being the prime example, that people only want the same thing over and over and over. And they're very much in the right frame of mind to say, can King Kong please do the King Kong thing so we can make a few bucks off it?
Even
why I would think otherwise is just
even in this story, like, it follows the same beats as 1933 as well, especially with Kong. You know, It's like they go to the island, you don't see him for a long time, they see him, they knock him out with a substance, whether it's a gas bomb or a berry,
air-based vapor waves,
and then they put him on a raft, take him back to their homeland. You know, all those things are actually exactly the same. And
it's all kind of a moot point, really, because as we both said, we like it when he picks up the train, we like it when he picks up the woman, we like it when he goes up the building. So they should have taken more risks, but we especially liked those moments. I like what they did. I dislike the presumption they couldn't have done something different. Yep.
Okay, so that covers Fumi. Next character.
We talked about her. There isn't much to say about her, is it, really? She comes across a bit of a nag, which is unfortunate.
Oh, no, I thought she was... do you think she's a nag? I don't think she sounds like a nag.
Well, she has a typical sibling-like relationship with her brother, where she's like telling him what to do and stuff, right? And it's kind of a bit bossy of him, which I think is fine. But it's very kind of, like I say, it's typical of like a a minor female role is easily characterized as like, oh, you know this kind of girl, don't you? We've all met one of those. It has that sort of vibe to it.
I suppose a little bit, yeah.
And I would disagree with it, although I think the actress is good in the role. So
she has a slightly bigger part in the Japanese version. They have more interaction when they're having their final meal together before they all go off. And there's a bit more nuance there, a bit more development. And then we've got, continue with the characters, Kazuo Fujita. So that's
this is the fiance of.
This is the fiance. He's played by Kenji Sahara. He's the fiance. He makes string, and that's that.
Attractive guy, though, I will say, because so often we get fellas.
I thought Samu was. I thought he was the tasty piece.
Okay, well, I was just going to say, like, often we're presented with the visage of the fiance, shall we say, the fiance archetype, and I'm like, really, this is the guy. But this time I was like, this is the guy.
I mean, don't get, he is an attractive guy. I'll just,
Who's sexist now? Not me.
Actually, I was pleased that their relationship wasn't a shoehorned in, let's have the main and the male and the female get together. That whole byplay, I'm glad that wasn't the focus.
And I would argue that much more so than, what is it, Andaro? What's the guy's name in King Kong?
Driscoll.
Yeah, they have this supposed romance, and when she's in trouble, I don't think this guy, macho sailor as he may be, has got any ability to do anything about it, really. But when this guy's fiance's in peril because Kong's taken her, I'm like, even their shallow connection they've set up is enough for me to feel like, oh yeah, they care. He cares about this girl, and he wants it to like not go bad, and they need to sort it out. They need to save her. And I feel like, as kind of thin as it is, I did get like that notion from it, which I think is missing sometimes in a lot of these sort of repetitive damsel in distress things. I felt like he actually did care about her.
That Kazuo actually cared about Fumi.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Like when he goes drives up to Hokkaido to save her.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't know. Sometimes I just feel like that's kind of a missing element, or it's taken for granted that we're just going to presume an emotional connection. And especially, in these Japanese movies, the romances are often played quite subtly. But I felt like, oh yeah, she's actually in trouble, and she seems really afraid, and he doesn't seem too happy about it either. They want to get her back to safety, and they do, and you're like, oh yeah, it's good.
I think there's a particularly good moment when he brings her back to the car after he saves her from the river. Their little dynamic there is quite looks quite real. I thought it was well acted. And I think maybe it helps having that their relationship was already established rather than it being a blossoming relationship.
Yeah, it feels slightly more mature than the same sort of like will they, won't they?
Yes.
Over that's well trodden territory, and that will they, won't they is almost certainly going to end up in they will.
Yep.
So I think that maybe adds a freshness to it, where you feel like, oh yeah, this is like maybe a bit more mature of a relationship, and the love triangle in the original Godzilla isn't completely uninteresting, but that was
quite an interesting take to have a love triangle like that. I think
the way it sort of plays with cultural norms in Japan is really good.
Yes.
But still, you kind of know how it's going to play out.
Oh, I get you. Yeah.
So, and I don't think that's to do with it being an old movie either. I think it would have been predictable when it was made. But that's what people want. As we have already talked about, predictability and repetitive stuff is a moneymaker.
With that though, how much do people really want that? Like really?
I think this is the silent majority thing.
Maybe.
That people do, by and large, like that stuff, and they're not the kind of people who sit down and record 2-hour podcasts about Godzilla. So I think we have to presume that if Hollywood is doing it, as we have talked about on and off the podcast, they will do what makes money, no matter what it is, until it stops making money. So the day that people don't want romance in films, you'll stop seeing it. So sit tight, mate.
Yeah, okay. So I mean that's kind of the majority of the Japanese cast. So the US version.
Oh yeah.
So because of the way it's cut, they cut out a lot of footage and then reconstructed it with new scenes to be like a news broadcast. So these are the American-based actors. So you have Eric Carter, the UN reporter, who's played by Michael Keith, Dr. Arnold Johnson, played by Harry Holcomb, and Yutaka Omura, played by James Yagi. And they're there essentially just to facilitate exposition and speed things up.
Yeah, and it does serve that purpose well in some regards. I think a few of these news segments don't add that much, actually. As the movie goes on, you could do with less of them, and there are scenes where they talk about something in these United Nation news broadcasts, which are they a real thing in the real world?
No, I don't think so.
They'll put some exposition in, and then it cuts back to the movie as it is. And there's one scene in particular where I can't remember exactly what was being said, but the newsreader said almost the exact same thing that you then hear on a car radio in the next shot. Yeah. It just feels like you don't really need all of them. I get it when they introduce it at the beginning, and I think for the time it was a good solution for expositional gaps, but it does almost at times sort of nullify the tension that the movie has, because they're talking about events in like mixed tense. Like sometimes it's past tense,
right,
and sometimes it's present tense, and you're just like, well, has this happened then already, or is it happening now?
Yeah.
It's odd.
Yeah, it's a bit hit and miss, really. Like the idea is good, but just not that well executed.
Yeah. I think it established a stereotype which a lot of people who maybe aren't directly familiar with Godzilla would assume that all Western Godzilla movies sort of do this sort of thing, which is maybe not necessarily the case, although they certainly do. They make up solutions of this type. But yeah, I think this sort of news broadcast from the English part of the world about this Japanese thing is really a common cliche, after this being a big example of it.
Yeah.
But honestly, I think that the UN news segments are probably my only criticism of the American cut, really.
I completely agree. Yeah. They do serve their purpose, just not brilliantly.
Yeah, you could probably just do with maybe 3. One beginning, middle, and end would be enough.
Yeah.
There's actually kind of maybe like 5 or 6, and sometimes they just pop up when you're like, I know what's going on, guys.
I wonder if they wanted to make it feel like more of a thing, rather than it looking like one guy looking at a camera cut into sequences from another movie. So they wanted to elaborate on it more. So that's probably why it felt like it dragged, because they wanted to actually make it a part of the movie.
They invest in the motif a bit too heavily, you say.
Well,
but
yeah.
What else could they do?
Yeah, really? Exactly. I think that's what they wanted to do. But yeah, it's just, it sadly does make it drag.
But I would never say that the American version drags in comparison to the Japanese one.
No.
With the first hour of it, although not completely meritless, is really, really sleep-inducingly slow.
On my first watch, I felt like that. Second watch, it was better.
I think I suffered my first watch because I'd been familiar with the American one for, nearly 20 years. So then I watched the Japanese one and I was just like, it's been a while since I watched any version of this. Was it always this slow? And, usually I would watch it with a friend like you or with my wife, and we'd be enjoying it and, half watching it sort of thing at times. And I was just like, oh my God, when is something going to happen? And that's an all too familiar thing in Godzilla movies, just generally, of I think my anticipation of things getting going and the story moving and seeing action is heightened more so with Godzilla as a franchise than it is other things. I'm not sort of tapping my foot and fidgeting about for the action to start when I'm watching a movie like Dune. I'm okay to just watch it, but because I'm like, where's Godzilla?
Yeah.
When are they going to get to the fireworks factory? I'm like that. And it makes it harder to watch the Japanese version of King Kong versus Godzilla, because I'm just like, come on, who at any point in time thought that it was sensible to wait an hour before this versus is in the title?
Yeah.
So
I don't know whether we've covered their character as such, but Godzilla and Kong themselves.
They're quite simple in this one. I think, like you said before, Kong is the protagonist pretty much and gets more to do in kind of both versions, whereas Godzilla is maybe you could say reduced down to purely a threat.
Yeah, because like he just seems like when his first moment, I suppose, is when he attacks the submarine, and that seems quite menacing. You hear his roar outside the sub. It's like, oh, here we go. But he's not too scary either. He's still quite family friendly, and that's,
they don't bother with really trying to make him actually. He's more fun to watch him destroying stuff right from the outset.
Pretty much, yeah. And that's kind of his role. Is very surface level. But yeah, like you say, yeah, Kong, substance abuser Kong. I think he comes across as like, when I first watched it, I thought, oh God, he's such a doofus. But it was
the way
intentional. Well, there's that too.
It's a very mean thing to think.
But just thought like, he's getting drunk, he's being carried around, and there's that, in the last fight when he does that rolling dodge and he knocks himself out on the rocks, and it's just like, he just seems like such an oaf.
Yeah, you're right, actually. But I guess when you take it as like, this is just a comedy, it's like, it's supposed to look stupid. It's supposed to be like that.
Yeah. I think it was a good idea to, like, the thing that they did do, where they I think they did take some risks to reinvent Kong a bit, was to essentially give him superpowers.
Make him an electric type Pokemon even.
Yeah, he takes a bite of the old electric spaghetti, juices him up, and I think that was a good way to take on, because obviously Godzilla's so powerful. It's like, well, how could Kong possibly beat him? And I think that was a good risk they took to kind of give him those electric superpowers, essentially. Yeah,
I guess you could argue like, is this like kind of like, again, diminishing the character into something that it's not? I mean, it's not
a little
the 33 character. It's a different Kong. So yeah, when I first watched it, I was just like, this is a bit nonsense, isn't it? But I think, again, it's like, they kind of joke about with the fact that Godzilla is obviously stronger. He breathes atomic breath. And they need to beef Kong up, so they give him this electric power, and it's supposed to be like, he needs it, so we gotta think of something.
Yeah,
he's got a superpower now. And it's like they did the same thing with the axe in the modern one, which is a much better solution.
It is, yeah.
That's a generally better movie, if it's okay to say that.
I think it generally is. Yeah, I think that's fair.
I wonder, this is the thing though, is like, we are very much enjoying and obviously discussing the 60s version of this, matchup. I wouldn't say it holds up perfectly by any means, but it creates its own historical sort of moment, and it's interesting to look back on.
Yeah.
Are people going to be watching Godzilla versus Kong in 60 years, in 2081? Going to be a couple of white boys doing a podcast on that?
Probably.
I guess that's more a comment on podcasting than the movie.
Whether in the public conscience, do you think, will it hold up? Probably not.
Sadly not. And I think that, in my own opinion, and I'm, not to make a singular discussion of this, but I think the volume of CGI action movies we have now is so vast that it will outdate far quicker than King Kong versus Godzilla did in the 60s, which was already made to look silly at the time on purpose. So it kind of like sits in this little like costumed, wrestling match thing, which was fun then and is fun now. Whereas the CG of Godzilla vs. Kong is likely to date, or if not, be replaced with something which looks far more exciting.
Yeah, because like these ones, they're a niche, whereas a CG action movie is not niche in any regard. So
no, you're right. Yeah, it's the big thing. And
suit actors fighting. I mean, you would never even see that now.
I mean,
would you? I don't know.
I think it's possible. Like, if you think about something like Team America World Police.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Then it's definitely possible. And, I wish they'd done another one of those. Not the same exact thing, but they could have done more puppetry, marionette things with that sort of movie maker. It's torturous to make. If you look into the making of that film, it's obvious why they didn't do more of them.
Yeah.
But it was a great movie when it came out. I've not seen it for a long time, so I don't know if I would enjoy it now, but I really liked it when it came out. And I could certainly see some comedians doing something with costumes like that. But yeah, I see what you're saying. It's like, it makes the point well that the modern Godzilla versus Kong is not in any way a singular experience. You can get that same experience somewhere else.
Pretty much, yeah.
I still feel like it's my current favourite out of any Godzilla movie, though. Still, I would go on record to say it's my absolute favourite one.
Interesting. I don't think I actually have a favourite. Probably All Out Attack.
Well, that's the thing. I guess you can separate these things out into eras, or like, is it practical effects or digital effects? Is it American or Japanese?
Well, you could do, but even as a whole, I always want to watch it.
Yeah, for all out entertainment, if I was just going to sit down and I just press play, I'm going to have a good time. I know I can get that. All Out Attacks is fantastic, but personally, I would, maybe not watch it as frequently. Just out of my own personal choice.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. So yeah, the suits in this. So Kong's suit. I mean, I laughed when he first appeared on screen. I thought it was laughably bad.
It's not great, and I don't know that this is entirely deliberate, not to make this too repetitive a point about every single thing, but like, this doesn't feel like they knew how awful it looked necessarily.
Yeah, I think so.
And the arms change length at certain times.
Yeah, there's points when he's running to Tokyo and his arms are up and he's just looks hilarious. He
goes from being sort of like purely ape-like, as you would imagine Kong to be, and then he's more like orangutan-esque at times.
That's it. Yeah. So RKO, again, they said this, like, even though they wanted the moments, like, taking the girl up the building and stuff, they demanded that he not look anything like the 1933 King Kong.
That's interesting, because when I watched it, I was like, oh, they've really tried to get the face as close as they could. And they've really just, maybe they had the face absolutely spot on and they got that note through from America and they're like, we've got to take a blowtorch to this face and
just
reduce it down a bit, because it's like, but yeah, the face is awful, completely expressionless, because even with it being a man in a costume and at this early stage in the series, like, the Godzilla has some motion in the face and sort of, the mouth moves and the voice helps a bit. King Kong's just like...
It's it's he has some eye animations that might be.
Does he?
Yeah.
I don't recall that.
Well, one of the suits does. It might only be like a half suit.
Fleeting eye animation.
Yeah, like when I think when Godzilla blows up that helicopter with his atomic breath, he does this, like, Kong does this, like, blinking, like, huh?
Oh yeah. I remember having a good laugh about that.
So yeah, there's a few bits like that. But they went to a lot of trouble making the suit because apparently it's yak fur. That's what the suit's made out of, and that's really expensive.
But I'm sure they could have.
Maybe they could use literally anything, and I think it would have looked the same.
We take our modern manufacturing technologies for granted, probably, in as much as that maybe they just had to get some real fur.
Yeah, I suppose
to do it.
It was getting wet as well, so maybe yak fur would make sense. But yeah, ugly AF.
Yeah, Godzilla doesn't look anywhere near as bad by comparison.
No, I mean, he looks quite rubbery. But they made some, like, significant changes to him. So he used to have 4 toes and they gave him 3, because apparently 4 is bad luck in Japan. So they're like,
well, it's the whole Yakuza thing, isn't it?
Explain.
So I'll use an analogy for this of sorts, but in the West, we're very used to seeing our cartoon characters with 4 fingers, a thumb and 3 fingers, I suppose. And in Japanese animation, they always do the full 5. And this is because when you're in the Yakuza, the organized crime mafia of Japan, and if you do something that is frowned upon by the Yakuza, you can be punished by being made to cut off your pinky or a finger.
Right.
So that means that in public, you can be singled out as a potential criminal. That's why they make that the punishment. And if you happen to have less than 5 fingers on your hand, you could become stigmatized in Japanese culture, potentially. I don't mean this as a modern problem as such, although it may well be, but it's certainly a historic one. And I guess that is why they decided to reduce Godzilla's toes to 3 instead of 4, maybe.
Yeah, I guess that's it. That's got to be it. Yeah, so they reduced his toes to 3. They took away his little ears, which I don't think they come back until Godzilla 2000.
The ears are a bit like a non-event to me.
Oh.
Like, put them on, take them off. Like,
yeah, fine. And they gave him bigger dorsal plates as well.
Yeah, which I guess adds again to the more like, this is like the more comic book, cartoony, action amped up, you know, in its way sort of thing.
So I think the suits were designed to be more flexible for their fight scenes. So the actor who was in Kong's suit, he was actually sewn in to the suit, so he was in there for hours at a time while they were doing.
Jesus.
Yeah, it's quite hefty. So we had three fights.
You know, he just took a piss in that suit, don't you?
He must have done. You know, probably like when they're in the big pool or something. You know. So they had three fights. So the first one was between Kong and the octopus. So so that was it was live octopus in a miniature set, and they had that model, the face hugger model as well, which looked particularly disgusting.
Seamless special effects transition there.
The sound there was horrible.
I really do like seeing the giant octopus composited against the real people like so poorly, because it's just fun, but it is such a trope as well.
Then we got and then there were two fights between Kong and Godzilla. I think the final fight was the best one. I think that was the funniest one as well. And that's kind of what you've been waiting for. Makes sense. Yeah, just the start of the final fight I thought was hilarious. Like when they just dropped him from those balloons, from I don't know how high, and he just landed straight on his back and rolled down the mountain, such an unceremonious way. And
you get shots of both of them as basically like cuddly toys being chucked down the side of the mountain. Like the shot of Godzilla rolling down the side of the hill is like something you would like win out of a crane game. Yeah, it's like a little toy Godzilla. It's so like obviously not done in any sense of seriousness. Yeah, and of course this has everybody's favorite bit. Everybody's favorite part of any Godzilla movie is in this fight scene.
Yeah, with the tree in the mouth.
Tree in the mouth.
So good.
It's probably responsible for more long-term Godzilla fans have been birthed from watching this one scene than any other Godzilla moment, I would expect.
Yeah. So I kind of touched on it before, but the studio wanted everything to be funny, and so they were constantly getting notes for all the fights to be as funny as possible. And Tsuburaya, the special effects director, he was like totally on board. Whereas Honda wasn't so much with his, the human scenes.
Different kind of humor in mind, as you said.
Yeah, earlier, exactly. So this whole idea of having like funny fights, I think this essentially laid the groundwork for the rest of the Showa era. I think this sets up what we come to expect for pretty much everything until Heisei period, perhaps.
I think some of them are slightly more self-serious, a smidge more like, oh, this is a sci-fi story a little bit. Yeah, but there always a sense of ridiculousness in all of these.
Yeah, I mean, I think our viewing of these, like, it's a bit patchy because we've seen
bits and pieces.
Yeah, we've seen bits and pieces, like some you've seen, some I've seen, some we've seen together, but it's not all of them. So yeah, we couldn't say definitively. This is part of the journey that this podcast is taking, I suppose. We'll see, but I believe, this is the framework. But yeah, like you say, they do. Some can be more serious than others. But the fights in this were so much better than Raids, because like Raids, I know we spoke about it before, Godzilla Raids again, that the fights, they looked especially goofy because they had undercranked the footage.
Undercranked, yes.
Yeah, so the fights looked too fast. But not only that, I don't think the choreography was really there. It was just sort of...
Yeah, it's really just like two monsters looking at each other and smashing... They smash a castle in that one, don't they?
They do, yeah. And when they grapple as well, it's just sort of like... It's just two guys in suits messing about, almost.
Yeah, if you imagine it being in slow motion as it was intended to be, it would have been quite dull.
Yeah, probably would have been, yeah. The two suit actors, I think they knew martial arts of some degree, and because they choreographed the fights themselves.
That makes sense, I guess.
And that's what they went with.
Just on this tree thing once more, though. Yes. I think you and I benefited from the sort of
it not being an already established funny thing.
Exactly.
Yep.
This sort of terminally online existence that we all live now means that most people will have been able to see a GIF of this without any context. But yeah, seeing it when you didn't know it was coming, that was a really nice experience, which is, not always possible these days with old movies.
Yeah, so. That's true. Yeah, because I did think that when I was rewatching it, because I was expecting it to come up. I was like, because when we kind of like talk about our favorite moment in the film, which we'll get to, I was like, oh, am I going to pick this bit again? And I was like, well, I mean, it is my favorite bit, but I was like, I picked a new favorite that's not quite so,
This is maybe more a favorite memory more than it's a favorite part in a way.
Yeah. There wasn't as much miniature. I mean, there was miniature work in this, but I don't feel like there was quite as much as there has been in the previous two.
I would not say this is cutting corners by any means, but I think they do save themselves some money on the budget by setting pretty much all the fights just in like mountainous valley areas where there's no buildings. And I don't mind it really, because at least at this point we haven't seen that yet. I know we'll see a lot more of it. We'll probably see the same valley and the same mountain. It suits it, I think. I think the spectacle of Godzilla versus King Kong is enough that we don't always need them to be like in Shanghai, for example, at this stage.
Or smashing buildings.
Yeah, and they do have the one sort of castle destruction scene.
Yeah.
Which could play as a metaphor for the destruction of King Kong and Godzilla's reputations.
Absolutely.
But, I think it's just a bit of fun, really.
Yeah, I think that bit was especially good. Like when it's ripping apart, you can see the concrete and it looked like the steel and stuff of the building. I think there's a lot of detail in there.
But still at the point where the miniature work is...
Beyond compare.
Beyond compare.
Yeah.
Yes.
The only trouble I have with the miniature work is when they do people, and because they always look like little dolls, and it's fine, but I know from other films that I've seen after this point that they actually get worse. So like in this one, when Taco is coming down from the helicopter, it looks like a Ken doll squatting for a shit. It's just like, it's hilarious. I mean, looking at that character and the way he comes down off the winch, it's kind of in a similar way, and it is funny, so it works. But I feel like they put less effort in with when it comes to modeling people in miniatures. It's never that's always the bit that lets it down for me.
Well, this will come to bear for us, but the movies are going to get cheaper.
Yep,
they're going to
come out faster.
There's going to be a sort of curve in the creativity, and then maybe a little bit of drop off, maybe, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think they create their own tone, I think. So we'll have to address this as and when we come to it. But it may be, the odd bit of poor miniature work will sort of have its appeal at the time, depending on what movie you're watching. So.
Yeah. Okay, so I mean, we've already talked a little bit about the differences between the US and the Japanese version, but the Japanese version, when I watched it, I noticed that the scan of the film, it seemed like they were changing film stock even in the middle of shots, and it was kind of giving this appearance of like, when you're streaming a movie or something and it buffers from SD to HD while you're watching. Yeah. And I was like, why is that? Like, this seems really strange. And I was looking it up. Apparently it's known for being a poorly preserved film.
Yeah, I read this on the wiki page as well. That it's been chopped about quite a bit, just generally. And scenes have just been lost. And right from the off in the American version, when they first show the UN building for their first UN news segment, I'm assuming it's stock footage of the era, because it looks like it was filmed on the cheap, probably just to be used in newsreels and probably used over and over and over. It's so grainy and dirty.
The US one was very grainy and dirty, yeah.
And it's just like, it's practically the first shot of the movie, and it's like, wow, look how wretchedly old this looks. Not all of it looks like that. It's inconsistent, like you say. But I think it's been a victim of kind of been treated sort of as not worth very much.
Well, so Honda, the only existing cut that he had was a heavily edited version that they used for children's matinees, and that cut out 24 minutes of footage. So for a long time, it was made up with really badly preserved scans of 16mm cuts.
Yeah.
But then was restored in 2016 with a 35mm print that was discovered. But it still looks like that print wasn't very well looked after, because like I say, when you see it changing mid-shot, it's like, oh.
And that's probably what we're seeing on the Criterion, isn't it?
I presume so. I couldn't find out, to be honest. So with the US version, it ignores, I think this is just a general note for anyone listening and watching these movies, that the US version, it ignores Raids Again as a movie, because Raids Again was gigantus in the West. So in this version, I don't think Godzilla had existed in the timeline prior to this point.
No, they sort of make it like he's appearing, and
for the first time. Yeah,
I think so.
So
yeah.
Steve Martin doesn't exist in this universe,
or at the very least, that the context of his existence is not really important to the story anyway, even if you do include raids. So
yeah,
so here he is.
Yeah, but something that I think actually influenced movies after this point was from the American cut, and that was because they kind of gave more context to why Godzilla and Kong were fighting each other, and they basically, not in so many words, but they said there's this ancient rivalry between them, and that's the conceit behind Godzilla versus Kong in 2021.
Yeah, it's that's the biggest part of it, which you could call remake in a way, that they've embellished that element of it.
Yeah, and I think that was something that I think when they were looking at this movie and rewriting it, they were like, well, why are they fighting? And I think that was a good and important change to make. And
it seems so odd that they didn't have a stronger reason when they first made it.
Yeah, it's just like I say, I mean, Honda wanted to do the satire about TV, and I don't think he cared that much about.
I guess you've got plenty of notes about how this originally started out as an American production, and there was like Godzilla versus Frankenstein going on or something like that.
Yeah, so okay, yeah, that's what I was going to bring up. Exactly that. So yeah, there was a lot of drama with between Willis O'Brien, the special effects director, special effects guy for King Kong 1933, and John Beck, the producer. So yeah, Willis O'Brien, he wrote a screenplay for King Kong versus Frankenstein.
Goodness sake, I mean.
And they were going to like shop this script around to producers, so he and John Beck. But no one would finance it because stop motion was too expensive.
I don't know if that was really the reason. Like,
why no one would? Well, probably because it was a terrible movie idea, right? Well, not necessarily, but
But King Kong vs Frankenstein sounds like something that you would scrape like ideas together for, like now, like, oh, it's all been done. What should we do? It's like, is that really the first thing they thought of?
Yeah,
that would be the natural rivalry, King Kong versus Frankenstein. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, it is an odd choice. Like, you could think of, I
think it's favourable to say that it was passed on because of effects concerns, when really it's like the reason, like you say, stop motion costs a lot of money, therefore the movie's going to have to make a lot of money to make it worth it, right? And it's not going to make a lot of money because people aren't going to want to watch King Kong versus Frankenstein. So it's kind of a roundabout way of saying the idea is bad, I think, rather than anything to do with money as such.
That's probably it. But John Beck, he then took the script to Toho behind Willis O'Brien's back. And Toho agreed. They financed it. They made the deal with RKO. But O'Brien was not credited, and he had no money to sue John Beck or Toho or anyone. So he was left completely uncredited for this movie, even though it was his, sort of his idea.
Yeah.
So and then he died a couple of months after the release, and his wife was saying like, oh yeah, the stress drove him to an early grave, basically, which is maybe quite dramatic, but I wouldn't be surprised that it would be such a stressful situation that it wouldn't have helped. So, and apparently Marion C. Cooper was pissed as well, because he was like, I would never allow a King Kong movie not to be stop motion. Having it in a suit is just ridiculous.
Because they, as is known, they fought against that in the original sort of movie and all of that. But
exactly.
I think it's really tragic what happened, and it's really nasty when these sort of things happen, especially in the entertainment industry, when you should be able to trust people just to like sort of, make fun things and then and not go behind people's backs. But it's also kind of favourable to say that like this idea would never have come about if not for O'Brien's sort of thinking. It's I know it's King Kong, but it's only like tangentially connected to what they were thinking about. So
yeah, I think
it's sort of Beck thinking up the concept and rather than saying let's both go to Japan and sell this, he just does it without. That's the thing, I think, rather than what the actual idea is. Like they formed a creative partnership and he abandoned that to basically pocket the money himself.
Yeah, that's it's tragic. But I do wonder, had O'Brien or Cooper for that matter been more involved, this might not have been the movie that it was. You know, it could have ended up being completely different. And this kind of, because this film was as successful as it was, you know, it spawned another 30-ish films. there's a chance that this film, you know, had they been involved, this might not have happened.
Oh yeah, would have changed.
We wouldn't have the legacy that we have today of Godzilla. So in a way, maybe it was a good thing.
I certainly don't think that King Kong versus Frankenstein would have done King Kong any favors, really, in terms of a legitimate sort of character legacy.
And Toho didn't really care about Godzilla at that point either.
I was under the impression that they were sort of looking around for a way to make a Godzilla movie, actually, and then this sort of fell in their lap. And they're like, oh, actually, this is an idea we can do, was the impression.
Maybe I'm wrong. I say they didn't care as in they didn't care enough to go out of the way to do something about it. They were hoping that something would land in their laps, perhaps. Yeah,
I guess they weren't churning out sort of, you know, thought-provoking Godzilla horror movies every year, were they? They were sort of like, we'll make a Godzilla movie at some point.
Yeah, it's basically taken a bit of a backseat.
Yeah.
So tragic. It's a bittersweet thing, really. I love the film that we got, despite how it was made and how it affected people. So it's a strange one, really. There was going to be a sequel, which did you know about this?
Not that I recall.
It's going to be called Continuation, King Kong versus Godzilla.
Good title, I think.
Yeah. So it was Shinichi.
This predates the notion of doing a part 2, because although I'm not certain it's the true sort of introduction of the thing or the convention, but Godfather Part 2 is often cited as like introducing the notion of using the number 2. So maybe like they were like continuation might be like the way people talk about sequels.
Oh right, I see. Yeah, maybe. So it was written by Sekizawa again. So he did that. But then it was soon scrapped. But interestingly, the plot was going to involve them finding Godzilla's lifeless body at the bottom of the bay, and they were going to revive him to take out Kong this time. But you know, that kind of answers the question of like, well, who won at the end? You know,
I see.
There you go.
But it's not canonical, is it? Just because they wrote it, they didn't make it.
It's not. But Toho, I think, in press statements, they were like, "Yeah, Kong won. Kong was victorious because Kong was the moneymaker at the time." They're like, "Of course he's going to win. He's the big ticket item."
Well, I'd say even now, even though the MonsterVerse stars Godzilla, King Kong is obviously the more culturally significant one and more recognizable. And sorry, Big G, but you're not the king.
So did you have a favorite moment that wasn't the tree for this film, or was the tree in the mouth your favorite still?
Tree in the mouth is such a seminal moment in my film viewing history. It would be reductive to call it favorite moment, so I will pick something else.
Okay.
I think on this particular viewing, my favorite moment was probably when they're on the island and the giant octopus appears, and one man, he's asleep, but he wakes up and he's like, "What's going on?" And Sakurai says, "Giant octopus, he's after the berry juice." And I was like, yes, this is the kind of exposition I'm into. And I just really found that very amusing.
Okay.
And I love it when silly lines are delivered earnestly. Often silly lines are delivered accidentally in these films, and we have laughed about that in the past. I think this one's very much like we're having a laugh here on purpose, and I think it was actually part of the dub, which was quite good, because the dub is fairly low effort, as you would presume it to be. But I wouldn't be too harsh on the American version, because I do think it's the better edit. It's more pacey, it's more enjoyable, it still keeps a lot of the humour and pretty much all of the action, and the characters are still the characters. I think it doesn't really change the cultural messaging of what there is there anyway. So yeah, Giant Octopus.
Okay, that's cool. That moment in the Japanese dub was actually quite funny as well, because in Japanese, octopus is taco. So when Sakurai gets up, he's like, "Oh, taco's outside," and then the other guy is like, "Oh, what? Taco, our boss, is here."
Oh, I see. There's like a joke that's been lost in translation there.
Yes. So that's why they needed that new line in there, which ended up being your favourite. So there you go.
Well, favourite. Well, I guess so, yeah.
Yeah, you said it, not me.
There was also a bit where there were some tanks coming out to fight Godzilla, and they were so clearly toy tanks that I really enjoyed that.
Okay. That was I had 2 moments to pick from.
Oh, okay.
That was my second. Okay. What I liked about it was they all came out really quickly, like, shit, Godzilla's here. he like blows up one of them, and they just nope out of there straight away. Like, they don't even try. They're like, that's it, turn back, go back in the little back in the barracks. That was a good moment. But my favorite was also from the dub, actually.
Oh yeah.
So when Fumiko is taken from the train, the dub audio recording of the actor is haunting. Like the way it's recorded, you can hear she kind of stood further away from the microphone.
Oh right, yeah, it's very sort of shrill, terrified.
Yes. Yeah, and like this, it sort of sounds like someone being murdered in a dark hallway in a horror movie or something. And it's quite jarring, because the rest of the dubbing is quite goofy, but this sounds so real. It really stuck with me. I really thought it was horrifying. I really enjoyed that. I mean, it says a lot about me, doesn't it, really?
Well, you're a horror fan, aren't you? So
yeah.
You're fine-tuned to moments of horror in non-horror movies, perhaps.
Yeah. Okay, so do you know what time it is?
Is it time for
a quiz?
A quiz? Oh, okay. That wasn't what I was going to say. Good.
No, I could tell you were hanging. You were like, is it going to be something else? Yeah. Are you ready? There's going to be 4 questions.
I'm always ready. You could,
And if you were listening carefully, actually, for one of the questions, I accidentally gave away one of the answers.
Well, I definitely will have paid attention to you saying whatever it was that you said at any point during this podcast.
Okay, right. Question 1. So this one's a bit of a flaky question, really. But so Sakurai refers to the discovery of Kong as being the scoop of the century. This is in the Japanese dub. And this was one of my favourite lines used in the American dub of which other Godzilla film? Was it Godzilla 2000? Godzilla, Mothra and King Ghidorah Giant Monsters All Out Attack? Or Godzilla Final Wars?
See, now you say the word scoop of the century. This, it's been said, hasn't it? Mm-hmm. I think... Is it All Out Attack?
Incorrect.
No.
It was Godzilla 2000.
I thought that, because they say it in the beginning, don't they?
Yeah, beginning-ish, yeah.
First act, shall we say.
Yeah. I had to remind myself. I listened over our old episodes to see where I mentioned it, because I couldn't remember.
Oh, she didn't mention it today?
No, this is another question.
Oh, okay. I thought that. Oh, okay.
So, it was Godzilla 2000. I thought it was in All Out Attack as well, but I was wrong. Whether it is a reference to this film or not is debatable, but probably not, but it made me laugh, so I included it. So question 2. There were plans to remake this as Godzilla vs. Kong before the 2021 movie, and it never came to be. Which year did they originally plan to release it? 1980, 1990, or 2000?
1990?
Correct. So, yeah, the plot, they were going to have Kong fall in love with a scientist who would then turn him into a cyborg.
Which is not that far away from having the robot Kong in other movies they've done. I guess 1990 because it's in a space between Western versions of both Kong and Godzilla. Like they did the 70s Kong, and then in the late 90s you had the Godzilla movie, and then ripe for a remake at that point. Yeah, like there's a gap there where they must have been trying to make something happen and just like nothing ever did. So well, part of the reason was Teddy Turner, he wanted too much money for the Kong license. Well, it probably would have been terrible anyway.
Yeah, it probably would have been. So thank God that didn't happen. Okay, so correct. Question 3. This is the one I accidentally let slip earlier.
Oh.
So what is Kong's height in this film? Is it 40 meters, 45 meters, or 50 meters? 50? Incorrect. It was 45.
Oh, so I wasn't paying attention.
Never mind. Okay. Question 4. So this is the last question. You've only had one correct answer so far, Greg.
All right.
Come on. So
usually I get all of them right. Pretty sure last episode I got 4 right, Paul.
I don't think so. I distinctly remember adding the buzzer sound in.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So, yeah. Okay, question 4. How many, however you want to say it, octopi or octopuses were used for the filming of the giant octopus attack scene?
Oh, God.
Was it 4?
Probably depressing number.
Was it 4, 5, or 6?
Let's just say 6. I mean, come on, they're killing octopuses left, right, and centre to make this movie.
Incorrect. It was 4.
Well, that's nice in some way, I suppose.
Well, they returned 3 of them to the sea. But
return to the sea doesn't mean they lived a nice, long, happy life in the sea.
True.
After being traumatised on the set of Godzilla vs. King Kong.
Yeah, apparently to get them to move around, they were blowing hot air at them.
Yeah, but it sucks to be an octopus in Hollywood or whatever.
Getting chewed up by the film industry. Well, the 4th one, he was eaten. He was Tsuburaya's dinner that day. So there you go. I thought you'd be thrilled to hear that.
So none right this time.
So yeah, you got 1 out of 4.
Did I? Oh, right, okay.
Not great.
No.
Never mind. Maybe you'll do better next time.
If I'd written the questions, I would have got them all right.
Probably. Hopefully. I would hope you did. Okay, so overall thoughts of the movie. I think when comparing the two, I think Japanese one has more of a cohesive story, but as I said, the pacing's too slow. I think the comedy might be a bit hit or miss depending on your sensibilities. There's too many characters and these overly convenient plot threads, like with the string and stuff like that. Whereas the US version has tighter pacing, where the story kind of took a back seat, which I think could be seen as a negative because it kind of gives it more of a B-movie feeling. But I mean, when we first watched it, that was pretty much exactly what I wanted at the time. That was exactly the kind of movie I wanted. So as to which I prefer over the other, I don't think it's definitive. Both have their merits and their detractors. But generally speaking, I prefer a more streamlined film.
Oh, yeah.
And the US one was more fun. So I would opt for the US one on a rewatch. I think but I really did enjoy both versions. I don't think I enjoyed it as much as when we watched it together the first time, because I think it's one of those kind of like, movie night with friends kind of thing. You were saying that to begin with. When you're watching it with people, it's a lot more fun. But it was still good fun, regardless. What about you?
Well, I think as we alluded to, it's a very kind of special movie for us in terms of starting our sort of like Godzilla, or rather inflating our Godzilla interest, shall you say. Because I think we've always been interested in the technical side of King Kong and Godzilla, and we in our youth enjoyed the 98 Godzilla movie and wanted to kind of see it in its authentic form, and this is where all that started for us on. And so there's some very fond memories attached to this specific movie, which make it kind of it's always fun to go back to, even with its flaws. But I would say it's easy to take for granted as well how well it sort of reestablishes the concept of the sort of kaiju movie for its era, where sometimes you can look at these films and sort of mock them for looking cheesy or for kind of not having very well-developed stories and things like that, and you kind of forget that they are just doing it for a laugh for the most part. And the thing with this film is that it does embrace its sort of B-movie persona, and it is really sort of they enjoy themselves to the fullest making. I think it is really sort of like just people having a good time making this sort of movie. And although the Japanese film, or the Japanese version is far too slow, and I would say that the American movie, although it has shortcomings with its new sequences not being that great, especially, it is a masterclass in how to re-edit a film and still retain everything that's good about it. So yeah, I think I wouldn't want to overstate it. I guess what I'm saying overall is like it is a wholly enjoyable movie, even with its age and even with its shortcomings. You can come at it from a intentionally comedic angle, and it's really, good in that way. It's very funny. And there's also parts about it where it's like, yeah, this is just a silly film in any regard, so it's enjoyable in that way too. So deceptively well-made film, I think. And yeah, like we talked about a bit, you could argue this doesn't really sort of live up to the name of either of its key characters, but it's also something that at the time was very new territory for them, and it's probably one of the best examples of what we sort of think of as Godzilla these days, which is like a fun, sort of approachable action comedy. In the past, we sort of criticised a lot of movies for not always performing that role to the best of their ability. This is still sort of a good benchmark, I think. So, yeah, it's a special movie to me and you, sort of just as a personal history thing. But I also think it's a genuinely sort of very good movie and one of the finer examples of the genre, even with how silly it is. I completely agree. It kind of weirdly kind of ticks every box no matter how you come at it. You're absolutely right. And I mean, whether this is true or not, but that feeling of it seemed like they were having fun creating this movie. Like you actually, I agree. You actually do get that feeling, like, just during the fight scenes, it's like, make it silly, make it funny, and you do get the impression, at least, with what you're presented, that they must have had a good time actually creating this movie, which is just, it's kind of a joy to see. Brilliant film. I suppose if we're gonna, our age-old question, can a newcomer come to this? What would you say? Well, needless to say, really, because I don't think we would be still watching and talking about Godzilla movies 15 years later after having seen it. I would say, if anything, this might be the best one to start with, because you get the Japanese authenticity of it. It's not maybe as heady to watch as the actual original one, if that isn't your cup of tea, or maybe not the audience you're with, if you want to watch a B movie or maybe watch Godzilla with a younger audience. And whether you enjoy it in good terms as the comedy is intended, or you just take the piss out of it, it's a good watch. So because I think it works as a throwaway one-time experience, or as something if you want to get more invested in Godzilla. As you said, it ticks a lot of boxes that Godzilla has. So if you're just going to watch one or look for an entry point, this is sort of giving you a pretty broad look of what you can expect. It's by no means a drama, obviously, but still very enjoyable movie. So agreed. So great film. Absolutely, thoroughly recommend to literally everyone. It's funny because I wouldn't put it in my top 10, top 25 movies even, but having talked about it now, I only watched it 2 days ago, but I would watch it again right now because it's it's good fun. It's just fun movie. It is, it is. So so thoroughly recommended. Okay, so
I think that about covers it for today. Yeah, so if people want to talk to you or the podcast, Graham, how would they go about that?
I would say get on that social media and say, you know what? I agree. King Kong versus Godzilla, very good movie. What are you going to talk about next? And then we will say, oh, well, you have to wait and see, mate. And if you want to tweet us, I guess it would be at Monster Island RP.
Yes.
And if you would like to go on Instagram, and which is also the location of Ben's lovely artwork, that would be Monster Island Radio.
Yes, that is correct.
And there aren't any others.
That's basically, yeah.
You could review us on the Spotify, I think.
Yeah.
Which probably has some algorithmic benefit. So do that as well, I guess.
I think is it Apple and Spotify, they have a rating system. So if you like us, be generous. Give us a nice rating. Yeah, we're very amicable podcasters as well. If you've got some criticism, we'd be more than happy to hear it. We like the grievances. We thrive off them. We are grudge holders here. So give us something to chew on, Godzilla-sized. Speaking of my drawings, I'm going to do a shameless plug here. Yeah. So, because we've been talking about King Kong a lot lately. Yeah. I've made I painted a King Kong picture. Oh, is that the one that I've seen? I saw it. You've seen it, yeah. You've seen it. So it is available on my INPRNT store. Oh, really? So yeah, if you see it on my Instagram, there's a link to my store, but it's INPRNT is the storefront, INPRNT.com. You look me up, Ben Emma Hall. You'll find my Kong painting. So if you wanna help me out and buy a print, I wouldn't say no. Or if you just want to see the picture and give it a like, I'd also appreciate that. So please check that out if you have time. So I guess that's it for today. Anything else to mention? No, I don't think so. Okay. Okay then. So until the next one, everybody. Bye. Bye.